Emotional needs. Every one of us has emotional needs. Dr. Willard Harley, a respected Christian psychologist, has conducted extensive studies which indicate that most adults possess a variety of 10 different emotional needs. Now, each of us has several needs that are at the top of that list, and those are called primary emotional needs. And the thing to understand about these needs is that they are as important to our emotions as food and water are to our physical being. So, imagine a man saying that since water is not easily accessible to me, I'm going to swear off water. I'll just do without it completely. Well, he could say that and he could even do that, but we know where we would be 30 to 60 days later. We would be at his funeral because dehydration would overtake his internal organs and he would be physically dead. Well, the same thing happens with our emotions. If they're not met, we begin to starve for them and crave for them. We get irritable and sometimes settle for counterfeit substitutes. And that's where the trouble starts. Like a man crawling through the desert, parched and desperate for water, and somebody tells him, you know, there's a small puddle of contaminated water over there. He would say, I don't care. Let me have it. I'll strain it through my teeth. Just give it to me, because he's so desperate for it. And in time, if these emotional needs are not met, we become emotionally dead. Now, of the 10 emotional needs, the 5 that are statistically highest for males are, number 1, sexual fulfillment. Number 2, admiration. Number 3, recreational companionship. Number 4, attractiveness of spouse. And number 5, domestic support. And by the way, domestic support just means that I have a need for somebody to manage my household, to, arrange the dinners and arrange the cleaning schedule. Maybe I'll help, but I need somebody to manage that. Somebody to manage the kids when they need new tennis shoes and things like that. That's domestic support. The 5 that are statistically highest for females are affection, conversation, honesty and openness, financial support, and I would like to broaden your thinking on that. It's not just in the area of finances, it's all around general security. Many women have a primary emotional need for security, to know that everything is going to be taken care of. And number 5 is family commitment. Now, it's important to understand that the previous 2 lists that I've just given you are based on statistics. Your primary emotional needs may be very different. Again, in a survey, these were the statistics that were produced from that survey, but they're not always indicative of an individual's primary emotional needs. As a matter of fact, I have seen them actually work the opposite of what the statistics say. So the list is just kind of a general guide to the needs that are highest on the male side and on the female side. So here's a little story that will help you understand emotional needs. Susie is a beautiful young lady with a great personality, but absolutely no interest in sports. Bobby is a handsome young jock who loves football. Bobby and Susie meet and are very attracted to each other, and they start dating. Want to guess where they are every Monday night during football season? That's right. They're either in the bleachers or they're watching the game on television. Now, Susie doesn't realize it, but every Monday night, she's making a deposit into Bobby's emotional need for recreational companionship. And because he likes the response he gets, Bobby sends Susie flowers to her at work. He gives her hugs and kisses and says complimentary things like, "Girl, you look so hot in that football jersey." So Bobby doesn't realize it, but he's making regular deposits into Susie's emotional need for affection. When Bobby calls Susie at work, she gets excited at the very appearance of his name on her caller ID. And she answers and she says, "Hey, baby, I'm not really supposed to take calls at work, but let me sneak outside where I can talk to you." If you could hear emotional needs being met, you could hear a cha-ching every time Bobby and Susie make their deposits. So in time, Bobby and Susie get married, and the distractions of life begin to creep in. The economy is bad, so Susie has to take a job. Bobby's mother takes ill, and he's at his parents' home a few nights a week taking care of his mom. Baby 1 comes along, and eventually baby 2. Now, I know we would rather not think of children as distractions, but there is a distracting component to children. It distracts from our marriage relationship. Susie is offered a promotion at work, but to take it, she must enroll in the evenings in an evening master's class at the local college, so she's busy doing that. Bobby is so swamped at work that when he gets home in the evening, he feels as though he just left, and the day was so fast-paced, he didn't have even a minute to stop and order flowers for Susie. And on Monday nights, when Bobby's watching football, guess where Susie is now? She's in the den on the computer studying for one of her finals. So because they've become distracted and are failing to make regular deposits into each other's emotional needs, the level of fulfillment in those areas is getting lower and lower and lower until they're completely empty. And just like an empty stomach begins to growl, Bobby and Susie begin to get irritable with each other. Contention settles in, and arguments begin to happen at the drop of a hat. This may sound very similar to what you're going through. Now when Bobby calls Susie at work, she sees his name on her caller ID. She grimaces, and she answers by saying, "What? Can't this wait till later? I told you I'm not supposed to take calls at work." What a big difference. Well, then one day, Susie is in the break room at work when a new male coworker comes in and says, "Susie, that shirt looks really great on you. You want to say it with me?" Cha-ching. Susie goes back to her cubicle. She shakes her head and she says, "I don't even know what just happened, but it felt really, really good." And before you know it, Susie is making more and more excuses to visit the break room. Now, I want to point out here that in most affairs, whether the affair is an emotional affair or a full-blown sexual affair, the big deal is not the other person. This is very difficult to understand, especially if you're the offended spouse, because you think it's all about the other person. It's not the other person. The big deal is the emotional needs that were being met. So again, the big deal is not the other person. The big deal is the emotional needs that are being met by that other person. At this point, a couple like Bobby and Susie will end up in a marriage counselor's office saying things like, "The love between us is just gone," or "The flame has just flickered out," or they may say something like, "There's just no chemistry between us anymore." And then they'll say something like this. They'll say, "I want it to be natural, like it was back then." But you see, that's the lie. It wasn't natural back then. It took a lot of work to fulfill each other's emotional needs, and now it's going to take a lot of work to make their marriage strong again. Louis Pavlov developed a theory of association. You've probably heard this in school. He would ring a bell, and then he would give the dog a piece of meat. And then he would ring the bell and give the dog a piece of meat every time. And he repeated it over and over until he could simply ring the bell, and his dog would begin to salivate, because to the dog, he associated the ringing of the bell with getting some yummy food, and he just knew that that was what was about to happen. So we humans are creatures of association. And in the beginning, Susie associated warm and fuzzy feelings with Bobby to the point that the very appearance of his name on her caller ID gave her instant joy. And when her emotional needs accounts became bankrupt and the same name showed up on her caller ID, it gave Susie an instant feeling of frustration. My wife has a great saying that's very true. She says, "We humans return to pleasure, but we avoid pain." So when Susie associated pleasure with Bobby, she'd get excited. When she associated pain and frustration and stress with Bobby, just his name showing up on her caller ID caused her to not want to answer it. So here's a saying that you should memorize. It's my wife's saying. Humans avoid pain and return to pleasure. Really, let that sink down in your memory. Humans avoid pain and return to pleasure. So in your interaction with your spouse, is it a pleasurable experience or is it a painful experience? If it's a painful experience, don't be surprised that they're not anxious to hurry home and be with you, because they associate you with pain and then try to avoid it. So therefore, if you associate pain, frustration, and tension with your spouse, you will avoid him or her. On the other hand, if you associate pleasure, fun, and peace with your spouse, you will want to be with him or her often. So the problem when it comes to primary emotional needs is that few people know what theirs are. For years, I have asked people this question, and they can tell me kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit what they feel like they might be, but I've never met a couple that could articulate their primary emotional needs. They can describe what they think is their strongest needs, but few can articulate those needs in a way that their spouse can clearly understand them, let alone know what to do to fulfill them. Really, if you don't even know what your own emotional needs are, how in the world could your spouse possibly know? And if they don't know what they are, how could they possibly begin to know how to fulfill them? So it's vitally important that you know yours and your spouse's primary emotional needs, what they are, and exactly what it will take to fulfill them. Therefore, you will complete the emotional needs assessment in your couples manual. Now, I cannot overstress the importance of going through this assessment, taking it carefully, and identifying these primary emotional needs and exactly what it's going to take to fulfill them. So here are some instructions to ensure proper outcomes for this assessment. Listen carefully. Start by reviewing the list of 10 emotional needs and ask yourself, if I could have only one of these needs fulfilled, which one would it be? And mark that need with a 1. Again, look at the 10 and say, if I only got one. Now, you're going to look at the list and say, no, there's several that I have to have. But again, just to help you order them or list them in order of priority, look at them and say, if I only got one, which one would it be? And mark that one with a 1. Next, look at the remaining 9 needs and ask yourself the same question and mark that need with a 2. So again, each one that you list, 1 and 2, as you list them, cover them up if you need to, but look at the remaining needs and say, now out of these 7, out of these 6, out of these 5, if I could only have one, which one would it be? And continue to rank them in order of priority. So continue this process until you have ranked each need in order of priority. Be completely honest with your selections and resist the temptation to manipulate the results. I'll be very transparent and tell you I have taken assessments like these, and it's very tempting to want to answer the way that I want to be viewed, or I want to be seen. Or in a case like this, you may be tempted to skew your answers a little bit just to make an impression on your spouse. Don't give in to that temptation. Be honest with yourself and let the results of this assessment be true to who you are and your primary emotional needs. Be sure to complete the emotional needs assessment by next week's meeting. Next week we will go over these and list very specific ways that each of these needs can be met. And by the time we're done, there will be no guesswork to it. You will know exactly what your primary emotional needs are. You will know exactly what your spouse's primary emotional needs are. You'll know exactly what it's going to take to fulfill yours, and you'll know exactly what it's going to take to fulfill your spouse's. Now, when these emotional needs are met, you become a happy camper. And you really can turn this around and get that same strength in your relationship like you had back then. Like the couple that says, I want it to be natural like it was back then. Again, it wasn't natural. It took work. This is the work that it's going to take to restore fulfillment in your relationship when it comes to emotional needs. By the way, I would like to highly recommend Dr. Willard Harley's book. It's called His Needs, Her Needs. And I would encourage you to pick that book up sometime and read it from cover to cover. But I pray that God will bless you and help you as you pursue the answers to your emotional needs.